are now going to discuss adolescent social emotional development. This is our last topic on adolescence. It takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. E. E. Cummings. This quote kind of sums up what it is to be an adolescent. Finding who you are. Okay, so we're going to start with Erikson. His theory during this stage is called identity versus role confusion. It's the 5th stage of development. This stage is the culmination of each of the earlier conflicts that, if resolved well, means a teenager has trust, autonomy, initiative, and industry. Remember, Erikson said that at any stage you may have to revisit previous conflicts. So a teenager may have to go back through all these conflicts to integrate all of the aspects of their self into a new self-identity. The whole point of this stage is coming up with an identity. Part of that is their social milieu. A new identity has to work for the teenager in his social environment. So can you think of instances where a teenager's identity might lead to rejection in social environments? This may make a teenager attempt to alter their identity since acceptance is so important to them. They want to be accepted by their peers, so if something about their identity means that they get rejected, they're going to try to change it so they'll be accepted. Real accomplishments are important to teenagers. Wholehearted and consistent recognition of real accomplishments, according to Erikson. These are achievements that have meanings in their culture. For example, some cultures might value high grades, being on a sports team, volunteering, but other cultures may have different accomplishments that have meaning. If these avenues of expression are denied, teenagers will rebel. If they can't find a way to get what they want to do, they'll rebel. And this thwarted drive is responsible for the cliques and gangs in America and fiercely nationalistic movements in other societies. So, negative behavior. Erikson saw negative behavior as fighting against identity diffusion. For example, intolerance for differences in peers, act of cruelty. A teenager's self-identity is in flux, making it difficult for them to be tolerant of others and themselves. There's a tension between developing a solid sense of self and feeling insecure, vulnerable, and threatened. Erikson advocated for better diagnosis and treatment of deviant behavior in teenagers, believing that behavior doesn't hold the same significance in adolescence as adulthood. He's the one who really said that teenagers needed to be treated differently because their behavior in adolescence means something different to them than it would mean to an adult. Ego identity. This is one's sense of who one is and what one stands for. Remember, Erikson was heavily influenced by Freud, who is the one who had the idea of the ego in his theory. So your ego is your sense of self. You have to make decisions about things like your future occupation, your ideological view of the world, political and religious beliefs, for example, your sexual orientation, your gender role behaviors. All of these are part of your ego identity. Formal operational thought helps adolescents make decisions at this time. So we know that not all people achieve formal operational thought. So do you think this affects their ability to establish their own ego identity? If they can't imagine possibilities beyond their own experiences, are they more likely to just adopt the beliefs of their parents or peers or their groups or their culture? Do jobs that everyone they know does? So what does it take to imagine an identity or a future for yourself that is different than what is expected of you? So formal operations plays a big role in this exploration of identity. So Erikson had this idea, what he called a psychological moratorium. This is a timeout period when adolescents experiment with different roles, values, beliefs, and relationships. It is during this time that many teens experience an identity crisis. They're trying to figure out who they are, so they go through this period of exploration. So what is an identity crisis? This is a turning point in development during which one examines one's values and makes decisions about life roles. It could be, what college do I go to? What career do I want? Should I have sex with my boyfriend or not? And so these are all things that teenagers struggle with, and they may feel overwhelmed with their options and the fact that their choices will limit possibilities. As soon as they choose a college, it's like they've lost all the other possibilities, and that could be a really hard time for teenagers. So in search for their own identity, teens may join groups, They might copy clothes, hairstyles, speech patterns, etc. They want to be part of a group. So in addition to their ego identity, they also have a group identity. And this is a revisit of the role experimentation that we see done in preschool. Okay, so they're just exploring different roles, exploring different identities. As with all of Erikson's stages, the end of adolescence does not mark the end of this conflict. It will be revisited at many points in an individual's life. You can constantly be struggling with your identity. So the good outcome of this stage is they come out with an identity of their own. They know who they are, they know what they want, they know what they believe. The bad outcome of this stage is that they've just sort of merged themselves with a group and just follow groups' beliefs and identities blindly and really don't have their own identity. So in the 1960s, James Marcia expanded on Erikson's theory. He said that identity is a process of exploration and commitment. He said that adolescence is not the stage of identity resolution or confusion, like Erikson said, but rather the degree to which one has explored and committed to an identity in a variety of life domains, such as vocation, religion, relationship choices, gender roles, and so on. So he said it's a mix of exploration due to identity crisis and commitment. So a combination of these two things led him to develop 4 states of identity. The first is diffusion. You have no commitment, no exploration. You haven't tried anything, you're just sort of floating along. The next is foreclosure. These people seem willing to commit to an identity, but it may just be what is expected of them. So this is high commitment, low exploration. They've not had an identity crisis and they're not exploring any other options. So we might see this in someone who just follows the career that their parents wanted them to be in, or goes to the school their parents wanted them to go to, or maybe someone who follows religious beliefs without ever having explored other religions. Okay, so this is foreclosure. Moratorium is the third stage. This is a state of identity crisis. You are currently in crisis. You're exploring different options, but you haven't committed to any yet. And then achievement. You've gone through a crisis and you've made choices. You're committed to your identity. So this is the best state to be. You've made effort to explore different options and then you've decided which one you want. You've made a commitment. So in this framework, identity is largely a result of choices regarding personal and social traits. So according to Marcia, this included sexual orientation, your set of values and your ideals, the vocational direction, things like that. Everything in your life is a state of you going through this process. So here's a graphic that helps make it make sense. So up here we have exploration, over here we have commitment. So high commitment, low exploration is foreclosure. I've made a choice without thinking. High commitment, high exploration, that's the identity achievement. That's what we want. I've thought about it and now I know what I should do with my life. Low commitment and low exploration make identity diffusion. I don't know and I don't care what I'm supposed to do with my life. And then low commitment but high exploration is moratorium. I'm thinking about what I should do. And in any domain in your life, you tend to go through this cycle, but remember the goal here is achievement, to think about things and decide. So here's your quest for this topic. Look up Derek Black. He's associated with white supremacy, if you're having a hard time finding his name. What does his story tell us about identity crisis and formation? And when you find his story, I'd really like you to use some of the terms from Marcia's identity to explain Derek Black's story. So next is how ethnicity and identity relate to each other. Ethnicity, race, sex, religion, etc. all play a role in the self-identity of the individual. So your ethnicity is a big part of your identity. So ethnic minorities. Teens who are members of the dominant culture in our country, that's white, Christian, Protestant, usually have an easier time with the development of their self-identity. They usually just have one set of cultural values to assimilate into their identities. Their ethnicity matches the culture, so it's easy for them to find their identity. But those who belong to a minority have 2 sets of values. They have the values of the dominant cultures and their specific minority group. If these values conflict, The teen has to figure out which is more important to him or her and incorporate that into their identity. If their parents believe one thing that contradicts with the culture, the teenager has to reconcile those and figure out. Some may pick and choose, some from one culture, some from another culture. Example might be a Catholic woman who chooses to remain Catholic, but she also chooses to use birth control, which is contrary to a lot of Catholic beliefs. Teens and minorities often experience prejudice and discrimination. They might have a scarcity of successful role models of their own ethnicity, and their cultural heroes of their own country might be ignored by the dominant culture. If these teens choose to embrace the dominant culture too strongly, they may be rejected by their ethnic group. But rejecting the dominant culture may limit their opportunities, and they may already face limited opportunities. So they have a real struggle here. So now we're going to talk about the development of ethnic identity. Okay, this is the sense of belonging to an ethnic group. It happens in 3 stages. The first is unexamined ethnic identity. This would be similar to Marcia's states of diffusion or foreclosure. So maybe the teen hasn't given much thought to their ethnic identity at all. In that case, it's diffusion. Or maybe the teen has adopted the value of the dominant group or their minority group based solely on the society or parental values without giving it any thought at all. That's foreclosure. Next is the ethnic identity search. This is similar to Marcia's moratorium stage. Maybe based on a key instant that makes teens aware of ethnicity, such as an act of discrimination, a racist comment, etc. The teen tends to explore their ethnic culture. They participate in cultural events, readings, talking to others. So everyone, or most everyone, tends to go through this, where you really start to explore your ethnic heritage. And then we go through to an achieved ethnic identity, which is similar to Marcia's identity achievement status. Clear, confident acceptance of oneself as a member of one's ethnic group. And this can be harder to achieve for people who are biracial, because they have more than one ethnic identity to explore. So when does this search happen? Well, only about 1/3 of African American 8th graders show evidence of ethnic identity search, but half of African American 10th graders. So most movement between these stages is between 16 to 19 years old. So it seems to be late adolescence when this search for ethnic identity happens. College undergrads show higher levels of ethnic identity achievement than 11th or 12th graders, so this might be part of the college experience too. So how do we help teens with this? Well, parents and other mentors can facilitate adolescent ethnic identity. Be sensitive to cultural diversity. Minority adolescents score higher on measures of ethnic identity if they have parents who try to prepare them for living in a culturally diverse society. So parents who aren't just teaching them how to live in their own ethnic culture, but how to live in a culture that has a lot of ethnicities and a lot of different values. We will continue this in the next video.